hopefully it won't be full, but I think if it is, it bombs the rest of them out. Just stream it on the Facebook.
How are we doing, guys? We'll get started in 2 minutes. Just obviously getting everything set up.
Put it into the Facebook.
Whatever you need to do it on there.
Oh, I can't because you're on yours. You're on it. If I go on, it might bomb it. I can try. Won't be a sec, guys.
Live on Facebook.
Yeah, live on Facebook. And then just put it into the other group. Share it to newsfeed on a page. Should we put it on the main page or in the group?
Whatever. Guys, if you can all hear us all right, please just let us know. Just stick a thumbs up or something in the chat box. Let us know. And we'll be starting the actual webinar in 2 minutes.
I'll just go live on the main page. It doesn't matter, does it?
It's fine.
And then I'll share it to the group off that one.
Yeah.
Guys, same as last week. Any questions? Drop it in.
We'll probably miss most of the any questions that come up on Facebook. If you are watching on Facebook, we'll probably miss them. Obviously, for you guys, if you're on Zoom, please use Zoom for the questions.
We definitely will miss the Facebook ones.
This ain't live yet, I don't think.
No questions on Facebook. Also, Facebook, by the way, is at least 2 minutes behind. Or 8:15, but we'll be finished by the time Burnley kick off.
Have you done a webinar with me before?
We will. We'll be finished by the time Burnley kick off tonight. Definitely. Three matches better than
Don't be rushing off.
Right, cool. Oh, you who?
You might need to edit the Facebook post. I am leaving that now, so please get back onto there. Right.
Someone's just texted me saying, have you met Josh before?
Is it Charlotte?
It is. So we're not going to be ages, guys. Like I said, I think we're actually pretty ready to go. Yeah. Excuse, by the way, me wearing a different hoodie, but it is pretty cold today. And if I'm being totally honest, my FX one's down there. It's been on the floor for the past 2 days, so I hate wearing them. Can everyone hear us? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can hear us. Everyone can see the screen now. Just give us a quick thumbs up if you can see the screen. We're going to go from there.
Yeah. So I suppose there's a quick intro before we actually get into the detail of the webinar. Nutrition is going to be massive. Whatever your goal is, nutrition is going to be one of the key factors in achieving it. So whether that's performance related, whether it's body composition, or whether, like most people when they're starting out, whether it's weight loss. What we're going to do is we're going to try and cover with this webinar the things that you need to understand, things that you need to know about nutrition. Otherwise, you'll consistently be making poor choices, making decisions that are counterproductive to what you're trying to achieve. And they're going to be going against you in terms of what you...
Oh, wait, was that?
No, you're not on that. You're not on
that. No, all good with that.
Yeah, but you're not on it, so it's irrelevant. Sorry, guys, Jamie's trying to set up another stream for some reason. But basically, what we're trying to cover is make sure that you understand the main things and then give you some practical tips so that whether it's meal ideas, recipe ideas and things, just things that are going to help you out in terms of making these decisions so that you can move forward. Now, we're obviously only on sort of the other end of the message. You can drop something into the Facebook group if you're struggling. You can ask any questions on the app. You can message your PT. But hopefully what this will do tonight is just give you a bit of an insight into where to start, and what's important. And if you've been dieting for a long time, if you've been training for a long time, and this is something that you're already established with, then this is still always the key things that I go back to with my own diet and with my own coaching, because these are the fundamentals that never change, won't ever change. So you can still apply this in 20 years' time if your goals are completely different. These are still the things that we'll come back to. Before we start, anything that you want to sort of jump into?
I think for me, just quickly, we're going to talk about nutrition today, and we're not really mentioning too much about cardio. We've got a bit in there about weight loss, but I think it's really important at the minute we sort of answer the questions of what we've been asked from our clients and from our customers, because generally it means that that's what people are struggling with. You know, we're getting a lot of questions with it being at lockdown again about people sort of struggling because they think they're going to put weight on, or they were especially unsure about them losing weight anyway at this time. What we want to sort of go through is that nutrition really is the key, the biggest factor that we probably have. I'll probably say the biggest because it's certainly a big piece of the puzzle.
Not 80-20 though.
Not 80-20 like I said yesterday.
You only said that to me, they don't know, you said it. Oh, did you? Okay.
Basically, we know that it's so important, but if someone is trying to lose body fat, or someone is trying to lose weight as such, this is what we're going to go through. Really, nutrition is the thing that we've got to, if you're not watching it, but you know, you're not really going to get to where you want to be. Now, having said that, you won't get thrown at you because I've just gone live on Instagram, and anyone that jumps in, they'll take away from an Instagram story what they want to hear. They'll see someone's quick results, they'll see someone counting macros, they'll see high protein, low carbs, whatever it is, and they think that's what they need to do. What we're going to try and go through tonight is explain that that's not necessarily where you might need to start, and where do you start, and where do you progress, and what level are you at in terms of your nutrition to actually make sure that your nutrition plan works for you, where you start and actually gets you them results, and doesn't just get them here for this next 28 days. It actually gets them here for a long period. You can take this realistically. We want you to still be doing this in a year's time, 2 years' time. We want you to eat like this for life. It's not necessarily just about fat loss.
That might scare you, eat like this for life. What you'll see as we go through this is actually this is just giving you the fundamentals and the foundations of any sort of nutrition plan, so that you don't make bad decisions in terms of what angle to go for with your nutrition in the future. Right, guys, getting started. I will just say again, if you've got any questions, drop them into the chat. We'll probably intermittently be going to it rather than answering questions as they come through. And then we'll have a couple of minutes at the end if people still want to sort of ask anything that's not really related or broadly related to this. Then again, we'll cover on there. So, moving on. Nutrition, what we're going to cover is our 6 habits. Now, the 6 habits are where we always start. If you're on the 28-day challenge, you should by now know the 6 habits. This is the starting point of all nutrition plans, but it's also the reset point. It's the thing that when you feel like you've got to your goal, or you feel like you're going off track, or anything happens where you want to relook at your nutrition, this is always my thing that I bring people back to before we talk about numbers, before we talk about calories. So the 6 habits are going to be really important to understand. Understanding calories and macros, that's obviously key, and I'm sure that you've all heard by now about energy balance, and you've all been told that energy deficit is the main thing for fat loss, which is absolutely true, but it can also be really misleading. And you know, you might get some people saying, no, it's not about that, it's more about hormones, it's more about other sort of gut health functions and other changes that go on. Realistically, it is still about calorie balance. You can never sort of write that off. However, I'm going to hopefully help you to understand where the confusion comes in, and weigh-ins play into that, because how many times have we done a weigh-in sort of 1 week in and we've lost a stone and we think this is going perfect, and then 2-3 weeks later we're actually back to where we started. And that, you know, that's physiology. That's what happens on some of these diet plans, and there's no real way around that as well. You know, if we're setting up for long-term sustainable weight loss, it doesn't mean slow weight loss. It doesn't mean slower than you would be getting. What it comes back to is, are we losing weight or are we losing body fat? There's a rate that you can lose body fat at pretty much your fastest, but if you're not losing lean mass and you're eating more food throughout and you're better hydrated throughout, your weight is going to consistently be a little bit heavier, even though your fat loss might be at the same rate. Recommendations are all over the place. I'm going to go through a couple of examples. Tracking food, hitting macros. We get questions on that all the time, don't we, in terms of whether you should be starting with macros and then practical easy meal choices.
I'm going to put our hands up here because we expect a certain sort of, I won't say accountability, but we expect a certain level of consideration when people come and train with us at FX. We expect you to sort of go learn about nutrition a little bit. We expect people to understand it a little bit, and therefore everything that we sort of tell you might be focused around macros. As a PT, as a coach, I genuinely sort of talk about macros because we expect that people have sort of considered why we count. We expect that you've already seen this presentation, and not that you've already seen it, but you've already
not this actual presentation.
You've already accepted, sorry, that counting macros is something that you have to do. Now, what tonight we're going to try and go through is actually revisit that and question that and see for you yourself, where is it that you need to be focusing your attention? Because if you are not currently, haven't got the understanding on nutrition that you need, you maybe not got good nutritional habits that you need to be focused on before you go into that. At the end of the day, the reason I get my clients to count macros is because I find it really easy to keep them accountable to that macro chart. You know, I find it easy for me as a coach to go on and say, well, you know what, but you've at 400 calories more than I told you every day, and you haven't had enough protein, and that, because it's easy for me to look at it on a piece of paper. But that's what works for me as a coach. What we want to go through tonight is what works for you as an individual. Where is it that you start? Where are you as a client, or where are you as someone watching this on Facebook Live? Where do you need to focus your attention when it comes to nutrition? Do you need to be thinking good days, bad days, that's a sin, that's not a sin, that's too high in carbs, that's too, you know, all you do in the basics, and this is what we're going to go, I think it's the next slide, about the 6 habits.
Rick, I've just seen your question come through, and I will address it now. We're not going to be doing this generally, but just before we sort of get rolling into this, in terms of, so the question is on sort of tracking other things, so tracking things that aren't macronutrients, so salt, cholesterol, vitamins, things like that. I mean, I'm obviously saying vitamins. I know that we've not put it in the question. Realistically, Rick, we're going to talk about this. Even tracking macros is difficult when it is debatable, shall we say, in terms of accuracy on apps like FitnessPal. FitnessPal is not really regulated. It's not really designed to track your macronutrition. There are numbers for that, but you're probably wanting to use a more accurate system that are more difficult to use, and generally you have to add the food choices yourself and things. But unless you're going to be extremely sort of dedicated to tracking them, the numbers that are coming up, you can probably write off. What we actually do from a nutrition coaching standpoint, and this is one of the areas that it's different, is that we look at the food groups and the food types, and we'll make assumptions on where deficiencies may arise. If you're eating something that hasn't got any, you know, your overall diet is excluding food groups, and that's meaning that you're at risk of certain vitamin deficiencies, certain nutrient deficiencies, we will see that because of the types of foods that you're eating. In terms of tracking those foods, to be honest, it's not really something that you need to worry about. We'll talk about this in terms of a fully balanced diet today, though. So, we're good?
We're going to try and get going for the football, we've said.
See, he says this. He says that it's me that talks. His intro is definitely longer than mine. Right, guys. So, our 6 habits. So, we have 6 things that we ask people to do straight away, and I'm just going to explain them a little bit. First one, the first 3 actually will increase. So, the first, whenever you start a diet, usually it's about taking things out. Ours are always different. The first 3 are increased. So, the first thing that I want people to do when they start is increase the fruit and veg intake to recommended levels. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is that exactly what that question was, in terms of macronutrition, straight away we can make sure that we're not likely to be building up certain micronutrient deficiencies. The other one, and the one that's probably more practical, more relevant for most people in terms of looking at this from a fat loss perspective, is that you will eat less food if you eat more. In terms of calories, you will take on less calories if you have more veg intake in your diet. And it's as simple as that. It is very filling. It's going to bulk out your meal. So not only is it adding to your macronutrition, it's also going to help you feel fuller for longer, less hungry, and less likely to sort of feel like you need additional food It's also going to completely, and I'm not going to go into this, but it's going to change what your actual cravings are for food as well. You're not necessarily going to want loads of sort of high sugar foods in between your meals if you've got a decent amount of veg, and it all comes back to this sort of more food volume. Increasing your fluid intake, so drinking recommended levels of water. Now, if you're already on your 5 a day for veg, you may need to increase it, but for some people that might actually be enough. If you're already drinking 3-4 litres of water, then I'm sure that you're absolutely fine. I'm sure that you don't need to do this. But for people that aren't considering these are the first things to consider. After this, increase protein to optimal levels. And we're going to talk about this. Protein recommendations are very, very low because it's based on where are you actually protein deficient. Protein deficiency isn't really something that anyone needs to worry about. But protein being optimized so that you're maintaining lean mass when you're dieting, you're repairing, you're recovering from training, you're being able to cover all of your other processes in your body as well, means that actually we do need, no one wants slower adaptation and slower results than what you could be getting. Everyone tends to want results as fast as possible. And this is where that optimal protein comes in. There's a difference between optimal and levels that avoid deficiency. And what basically in terms of protein, for us, we tend to have protein every meal. 3-4 servings a day is absolutely a starting point. We don't need to talk about supplements at this stage. It's just make sure that every meal has a reasonable amount of protein. If they are vegan sources of protein, you need to be aware that they are incomplete proteins. So you need to be putting certain food types together. And again, we can talk about this on a personal level. I'm not going to talk about it today in this webinar.
Good, because we.
However, I told you, you put 45 minutes. They're an hour, these webinars. We might be a little bit late. But if it's non-vegan source, if it's meat-based sources, then you're going to be good realistically on that. Then we start to cut things out. So we're going to reduce your junk food intake. We're going to reduce alcohol intake. That's it. It's as simple as that. There's 5 there. The last one is exactly what we spoke about. So it's just about tracking accurately and tracking consistently. So whether that means that you get MyFitnessPal or I personally use Chronometer, just find it a bit easier to use. But again, that's completely up to you guys which one you use. Whether you use a numbers tracking app like FitnessPal or Chronometer, or whether you take photos of your meals, or whether you have a written diary, it doesn't really matter, but you need accountability. You need to know that you are doing these things, because these things are easy to forget. But again, the things that if you're not doing, it's going to be holding you back in terms of your results.
Yeah, and for me, these things that's on this page, people talk about fruit and they talk about veg, and you hear all these taboos about don't eat fruit because it's too high in sugar. How much veg should I eat? I had some carrots with my tea. Well, we're not really talking about that. We're talking about like your veg intake. When Josh is talking about, eating protein every meal, I sort of tend to tell my clients, you don't really eat too much veg. It's very difficult for someone to have, too much of something when it comes to like vegetables, because one, I don't think anyone really eats loads of veg because they love it. You're not going to binge on a broccoli stick, but I do think that it's important that you understand that when we say eat more veg, it's not about just adding some carrots in your tea. It's genuinely about having veg and green plates and things like that in the majority of the meals. Just similar sort of when we talk about protein and stuff, it's the same. Now, that's where people find it difficult increasing protein levels and changing their diets, because just so that we're not stupid, we dieted exactly the same as everybody else in Great Britain when we were growing up and before we knew about nutrition. It was the same sort of methodology that we're taught as kids. Finish what's on your plate, eat this is a good meal, eat this. Now, that's not necessarily anyone's fault. It's just the way that it was and the way that it has been. We're quite lucky and fortunate at the minute as coaches and as with the amount of information that's available to us from a scientific sort of standpoint. All of this isn't necessarily what we teach, isn't opinion. It's not my opinion or Josh's opinion. It's always sort of evidence-backed. It's always things that we know for 99% of the population, 99% of people, that this is where you've got to start. And this is what you've got to get right first with the staple of diet. I know that I had some comments last year. I remember when the Game Changers documentary came out about, is plant-based the best because I've seen this research and this is what the Netflix documentary said. And for me, that just epitomises the issue that you guys have got, is that you've got someone like me and Josh that's telling you this. And Josh, by the way, he's clever than me. He's got a lot more nutrition qualifications than me. But then you've got a documentary on Netflix that tells you something completely different. And then you've got Instagram, and then you've got Facebook, and then you've got someone selling you a tea or a shake complex and things like that. And all these different people are telling you a different thing, just to try to make sure that you buy into their way of dieting. The problem with that is that the majority of things that you're getting told has been based around someone trying to make money off you. And what we really want to try and do tonight is sort of break that down, have a look at it, look at what we need in our diet, and this is where we've got to start, and then build from doing these. Now, having said that, the last one on here is track accurately and consistently. Let me just add to that.
Can you all tell that Jamie's rushing?
Let me just add to that. If you are concentrating too much on tracking accurately and consistently, that's allowing your mindset to sort of think, bollocks, that's too difficult for me, or I'm not going to do that because it's too hard for me to do, or it's one step too far. Then if you're doing the rest of it and you're doing the other ones, that's where you start. Once they become habits, and actually habits that you do on a daily basis, a weekly basis, you can continue them long term. That's why we said at the start of this, we want you to do this for life. This should be something that we consider as a habit, as the type of person that you are if you was on our webinar last week, something that you do all the time. It shouldn't just be a diet for 6 to 8 weeks or whatever. It should be something that we eat veg as part of a healthy diet all the time. We eat a lot of protein all the time, or an optimal amount of protein, I should say, all the time. We're drinking enough water. These are just things that we should be doing on a daily basis, that because of maybe the way that we've been brought up, or because of our lifestyles at the minute, the pressures that we're under with work and speed and trying to get finished for football, etc.
There's absolutely, can I just say, you've spent 10 minutes on the intro, there is absolutely no way that you can be good on time. Watching rush me as we get halfway through this now. Only thing that I'll add to that, Jamie said obviously very few people struggle with having a lot of veg. If you're used to dieting to fairly sort of extreme levels, you might actually, something that I've struggled with myself, is that you can actually get issues there. It's all obviously dependent on overall gut health, overall body health and things. But if you're having huge amounts of really high fiber food, you might actually find that your digestion starts playing up a little bit and you start to not feel great as well. These are all things that we'll cover. I think that the main thing that we have to be aware of is that when we're saying you eat like this for life, that's because this isn't going to highlight one nutritional approach. This is going to give you some fundamentals, and your diet is going to constantly be changing and adapting to the situation you're in. There's no right or wrong with this. There's no, when we've spoke about this isn't sort of opinion, it's fact. It is facts that we're going to go through, but it's all heavily dependent on the context as well. Hopefully that's what you'll take out today.
I'll just add that in the last sentence.
I'm not rushing. You take your time, mate. I'm fine.
What I want to add to that is that what we tell you there is the foundation of a diet. Now, what actually gets the outcome of some diets is by manipulating some of the external things to this. Things like how much of a certain type of food, how many types of calories you eat, how many carbs you eat, for example. What we do on the outside of this is really where we go for weight loss, weight gain, muscle gain, endurance, performance, whatever it is. They're generally on the outside a lot of the time of these 6 main things anyway. So it's generally the fringe of that we sort of make big changes to, depending on what our goals are week to week.
I will just say on this,
moving
on, but it gets, I'm not in a rush, I've said this, you're the one rushing. Guys, you could spend all night here, I'm fine. In the big picture, obviously, guys, this can get really complex as we start to dig into it. It's not going to tonight. We're just going to sort of try and cover the basics. There are other levels to this that, we might at some point need to dig into and need you to understand if this is being applied and you're not getting the results, then obviously there's other levels that we might need to go into. That's all I'm saying. So calories. What are calories? You've all heard of it. Well, a calorie is simply a unit of energy. It's a measuring tool, like a meter or a kilo. It's just it's not really, it is just a way to quantify the amount of energy that we're taking and that we use. Because calories are the measure, it's not actually something that we metabolize. That's not really important for today's webinar, but if you are having any issues further down the line, it is going to be important, because it's something that's really important to understand, that yes, you can take on 1,500 calories, but what those calories are made up of can be a completely different diet. 1,500 calorie diets can have a completely different effect on your body, effect on weight loss, effect on training, and so on. So protein, carbs, carbohydrate, carbs. I had to put carbohydrate, aka carbs, because I didn't want to confuse anyone. Fats and alcohol. These are all the things that your calories are going to be made up of. So anytime that you eat food, apologies guys if you already know this, we'll only do 1 minute on this. Anytime that you eat food, these are the things that are making up your calories. There's nothing else. It's either coming from protein, carbohydrate, fats, or alcohol. Now, there's more things in your food, obviously. There's your micronutrients, so there's vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients. There's all sorts of other things. But what we're looking at today is these things that actually make up the numbers. When you say, oh, there's 500 calories in this chocolate bar, that's going to be mainly from carbohydrate and from fats. You'll notice that protein and carbs, 4 calories a gram, fats, 9 calories a gram. So fats is the one that is often picked out as we have to be really careful. And I do completely agree that we do have to be careful with fats, because it's easy to overdo. Simply because it's twice as calorie dense as the others. Alcohol then. Alcohol is almost as calorie dense as fat, and it has virtually no function. So we'll go into this. No function in terms of no benefit. Everything else has a benefit. Yeah. It has a benefit, I suppose, in some arguments. Energy balance. Last thing in terms of stating the obvious, so apologies again if you know it. Energy balance is where you're taking on the same amount of calories as you use. An energy surplus is when you're gaining weight, which means that you're taking on more calories than you're using. An energy deficit is when you're taking on less calories than you're using. So obviously you're going to lose weight. There's no question about this. There's no arguing about this. So anyone that says, I know that I've done webinars before and seminars before where people have said that doesn't apply in humans, that doesn't apply in people because we're dynamic systems. This applies always. However, the things going into this are more complex than people give it credit for.
This, by the way, is also known as calories in, calories out. Yeah,
so where I'm talking about energy surplus and energy deficit, you can swap the word energy for calorie. Again, calorie is just a measure of energy. So things to consider. In most cases, energy intake isn't exact. So again, coming back to the question that we've had there about tracking macronutrients. Well, actually, if we step back and we look at tracking macronutrients, we look at tracking the actual food, there's going to be inherent error in that. So the system itself might not be perfect. The chances that you're going to be able to weigh absolutely everything that you eat and get the right sort of numbers added in is very low. I mean, you can get a good guess from tracking your food, but it is only a good guess. So I don't ever want anyone to be hung up on numbers to the point that they're overly bothered per gram on everything. Energy intake, tracking it is not going to be exact. So you need to be mindful of what's making up them numbers. Estimations of energies that you use, whether you're using a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or a MyZone belt, are generally not good at all. Those things are good at tracking actual movement. So if you're looking at how many steps you do, some are pretty accurate, but unless you're getting metabolic testing done, which none of you are, then these estimates of, I burned 1,200 calories on that run may be way off. And this is one of the key reasons that we say, don't add your calories back in what you've exercised off. I'll work out your calories before we sort of suggest what your calorie numbers are. And then obviously you just do your training. You don't exercise calories that you get on FitnessPal. It's not something to be adding into your diet unless we've asked you to do that.
Yeah, and just to add to that, now that's not to say that it's not a good measure of, it's not worth knowing how many calories your watch or your MyZone says for that workout, because generally it's pretty consistent. So for example, if my MyZone says you burn 1,000 calories because you've done an hour's worth of workout like this, then if the following day you come in and you do 500 calories, in the same amount of time, it probably means that the 500 calorie one was a little bit easier than the 1,000 calorie one in terms of cardiac output. So it is worthwhile considering. It's not worthwhile dismissing completely, or it doesn't really matter what that says, but it isn't necessarily a measure, like Josh was talking about, it being a measuring tool. not necessarily a measure of actual how many calories your body's allowed to eat because your Garmin or your MyZone or your Fitbit said you burn 4,000 calories on your 4-hour walk. It takes a lot of other things into consideration when it's doing that, and I think that's one of the biggest mistakes in it that people make.
I think that it's, you know,
we saw it in cycling at a lot of ages. You've got like cycling, like the amount of calories if someone's out on the bike for 6 hours, like really hard for people to judge how many calories they've actually burned and how many they need to
you know, in competitive cycling and things, you get issues that people can't really eat that many calories. But again, actually monitoring how many's going out, unless you've got specialist equipment to use that, your heart rate monitor may be correlated, but it's not going to be perfect in terms of estimations, especially if you've not had an initial test done to say at this percentage you're burning this many calories. So just something to be aware of. And energy output shifts massively, and yo-yo dieting is one of the biggest things for this. That if you are constantly on really low calories, or you've been dieting for a long time, your body is going to adapt. It's going to try to conserve energy. Whatever you might hear on social media about this not happening, 100% this will happen, potentially. This may not be the reason that people are struggling to lose weight, but also it certainly is something that we know happens, especially in people that are quite active, that are training quite a bit as well. So something to be aware of is that loads of things can shift energy output. But stress levels, if you're obviously looking at things like menstrual cycles, they can all have a massive impact on this overall sort of how many calories your body's using. So something that we need to consider. And then in general, your monitoring methods as to whether you are in energy balance, not in terms of tracking food, but in terms of tracking your body weight, are probably invalid, because you're probably looking at weight fluctuations. And then we've got to consider what are normal daily weight fluctuations, what are normal monthly weight fluctuations, and we need to build a bigger picture for that. Also, final point, food contains more than macros. We've already alluded to this. We're not really going to talk about macronutrition today, but vitamins, minerals, things that are essential to health, we need to get from our diet. And realistically, what we want is diets that don't really exclude many food groups. We can exclude food groups. It's not going to be an issue, but we have to be aware of the impact. If you just say, I'm not eating this, this, and this, you have to be aware that your micronutrition, your vitamins, your minerals, you may be taking out all of the key sources of those vitamins and minerals. That can lead to deficiency, and that can have knock-on effects further down the line in terms of immunity, hormone function, and so on.
I think this is, for me, this is one of the big things. If you remember, if anyone was on last week, you'll have heard us talking about, like, you know, how you want to be as a person, what you want to do. Now, in terms of not necessarily related specifically to energy balance and things, but talking about why most people start to track their diet, I think it's fair to say that most people start to track or start to consider energy balance when they're either trying to increase their performance or lose weight. I'm gonna guess that the majority of people watching this today are trying to lose weight, trying to drop, and trying to be in a calorie deficit or energy deficiency, as we might call it, and we're trying to lose weight. Now, sometimes what people don't consider when we talk about energy balance is actually the impact that has on the external parts of the life. So, for example, if someone has, a poor sleep pattern because they're in too big an energy deficit, or someone's no energy during the day, or someone gets these cravings, for me, these are things that people don't consider as important. You consider whether or not you're losing weight, and that's how the majority of people judge whether this is a good diet. Am I actually jumping on the scales, and am I seeing that number go down? Well, actually, what I think you might want to consider first, before you start to just consider, the only thing that matters for that 12-week period is whether your weight's dropping, is whether or not you're actually able to sustain these habits and sustain this new way of eating on a daily basis. If, for example, you are on a 4-week, I'm the worst for this, you can ask John. When I diet, I will diet, I'll do like a harsh diet, a hard diet, whatever you want to call it, because I'll do it for 4 weeks and I'll go back to eating, okay or whatever, maybe not okay. But when I think people, a lot of the time, we go into these diets and we go on to a diet for 4 weeks, and then once we come off that diet, because you're off the diet, because you're not necessarily considering, you're just trying to get through the fatigue, you know that you're starving, but you're just going to get through to the end of the diet. that's not really putting you in a good position for when that diet finishes, for when that 8 week or this, like for example, we're doing a 28-day challenge at the moment. Most people you will be sat on this thinking 28 days, how much weight can I lose in 28 days? And that's the wrong way for people to be looking at it. As bad as that sounds, and from my point of view, the issue that I have with this is I try to sell personal training. I sell personal training, I should say, not try to. I do sell quite a lot of personal training. But when we sell personal training, the judge of success of that program is generally just based around. So this 28-day challenge, a lot of you will have started and said, I want to lose this amount of weight within 28 days. Now, I would say to you, that ain't actually that difficult. We could give you the numbers to go up to lose that weight within 28 days. You'd be great. You then buy my program at the end of the 28 days because you've lost a stone in 28 days and you think, fantastic, I've lost that stone, I'm going to do it again. But then next month in February, when you're not doing that same massive deficit with the same shitty energy that you've got, same shitty sleep pattern that you've got, you know, that it's not sustainable. Therefore, the following month, you don't lose that same amount of weight again. All of a sudden, the programming is good. So what I'd ask you to consider when we're talking about energy balance is like, what is acceptable for you? What are you, where do you need to focus? Where do you need to be? What are you willing to do in terms of a diet and energy balance? Where are you willing to be? And for how long are you willing to be there? And do you understand it in terms of like, am I going a harsh diet where I'm going to drop 1,000 calories a day? Or are you actually better off ticking over, going a little bit higher and having, you know, maybe a bit less of a deficit, but more of the 6 habits that we spoke about before?
I think the only two things that I'd sort of build on that with is that exactly as Jamie's saying there, in terms of my job when I sort of step into more of a nutrition coaching role, the majority of people that come to see me are people that tend to struggle in terms of whether it's struggling to still get weight loss or whether it's struggling to get the results anymore. They tend not to be people that are just starting out. It tends to be people that have had at least a couple of weeks training, dieting, and sometimes really drastic extreme diets, whether it's for competition levels, like trying to diet really hard for a really long time, or whether it's just because they've had a lot of weight to lose. If you do this the wrong way, and I'll just sort of cover this, and that's the key point of this today, is that if you go about this the wrong way and you go to a really extreme diet that is an unhealthy, it's not that you should be losing weight slow, I'm not saying that, but if it's an unhealthy diet that is too extreme for your body at that point, it can lead to me then having to sit down and say, look, we've got 3-4 months now that we're going to have to sit and we're going to have to work on building health before we really look at doing anything from a weight loss point of view. So that's really important. The only other point that I was making was, will come back to me, I'm sure, at some point. I'm not sure what it was going to be. I'm sure that was the main thing.
They'll jump back on at half time.
So weight's, I know that we've mentioned this, but weight's going to fluctuate every single day in terms of, you're going to weigh probably less in the morning. I always tell people, for consistency, get up, go to the loo and get your weighing done early morning. Now, obviously, if you're getting weighed, whether it's, I know that you won't be going anywhere to get weighed at the minute, but if it was during training sessions and things, then just try and make sure that your weigh-ins, you understand the impact of changing the time of day. Because once you've had a meal, it's going to be different. Later on in the day, it's going to be different again. Once you've had, the more food that you've got, obviously, within your system is going to change it. The more sweat that you've used in the day. So if you wait after training rather than directly before training, that's going to have a massive impact. We need to understand all of this. We also need to understand that on a monthly basis and a weekly basis, whether it's changes to diet, changes to hormones, there's going to be things that mean that you retain more water. There's going to be things that mean that your body is generally holding more weight, not necessarily body fat, but more weight than on other days. So things to be aware of. But some of the things that can impact your weighing day to day is hydration levels, muscle glycogen, so how much food and energy you've actually got stored in your muscles, generally much higher from carbs. And if you've got carbs stored in your muscles, say that you've had a bit of a blowout on Saturday night and you've had a pizza, a pizza and chips, and then you've got up on Sunday morning and you think, fucking hell, I'm 3 kilos heavier. Well, what happens is that those carbs are stored with water. So it's not that you're 3 kilos of body fat heavier. Yeah, you might have a little bit, and I'm talking grams, more of body fat than you had, but not something noticeable. But what you've got is that you've got glycogen now stored in your system. You've got that glycogen stored with more water. You've probably had a lot of sodium as well. So you're generally probably holding a lot of water in general.
And just a note on that. Sorry, you done?
Yeah.
Just a note.
It's all right. I'll speak when I get a chance, guys.
This is where a lot of you get thrown off. And I know Emma mentioned last week in the group, she was like, yeah, but then I go on this blowout and I feel like I just may as well just toss it off. And a lot of the reason is because people then go on this blowout on a Saturday and they have like way more calories than they normally have. They're dieting all week, low carb all week. And then on a Saturday, go out, have that cheap deal that you get told it's a good idea, put 3 or 4 pounds on.
No, we've not covered refeeds today. We'll cover that on one of the advanced webinars.
Put like, you know, they go on low carbs and then basically have a pizza and chips and then wake up the day after 3 or 4 pounds heavier and just think, oh, what's the point if I can't even have a pizza and chips without putting 4 pounds on? What's the point in me carrying on? Well, that's what Josh is saying. It's not necessarily that you're putting 4 pounds of fat on. You're just not in a position to hold a lot of water. No. Then you go and hold a lot of water after that. So, not
only is that not necessarily what's happening, I'd be shocked if that is what's happening. you can eat some serious food if that's going on. Is it? Yeah. Guys, obviously food, fluid that's actually in your system, still in your digestive system, so still being broken down. But obviously, I know that this hopefully is quite an obvious. But I put a video on my on one of my social medias about 2 years ago of jumping on the scales, stepping off, having a bottle of water, and jumping back on. I'd have 500 mils of water, and obviously, I was about half a kilo heavier. It's what I know that is intuitive, but people don't think about that sometimes, especially not if it's sort of half an hour after you've eaten or had something to drink. Water retention, again, we've spoke about some of the reasons, but stress and things can be a big one. And clothing, obviously, we tend to suggest that you are at least consistent with your clothing, fairly minimal if you're weighing on your own at home, obviously. But if you're weighing somewhere that's more public, whether it's sort of in the centre, then you might want to be consistent in terms of the type of clothing that you're wearing for your weighing days. Just again, consistency when it comes to weighing is absolutely key. We've got a blog on that, and we'll share it in the group today as well. In terms of how much weight to lose, until you get to levels where you're feeling relatively lean, up to about 1% of body fat a week is probably reasonable. Of body mass, per week is probably reasonable. However, obviously this is going to be person to person dependent. Some people are going to find it really comfortable to lose 5 pounds a week. Some people are going to be a little bit more on the sort of steadier end. What I'm not saying, and this was back to the point of Jamie's last comment on the last slide, this is the one that I missed, is that it's not a case of you either diet healthily or you diet quickly. You can diet healthily and get massive weight loss. You can diet healthily and get really strong results. You just need to obviously understand what commitment you're actually making to your nutrition. And you need to understand that all diets that lose 5 pounds a week are not created equal. You know, there are much better ways and much worse ways to do it, especially when we put context in there. So weight loss versus fat loss, the only point that I'm going to make on this is, what are you monitoring? Are you monitoring body weight? Are you stepping on the scales? Because if you're stepping on any scales, unless they are professional level and beyond, so nothing that anyone's going to have at home, then you're monitoring body weight. They might give you a number for body fat, but it's not accurate enough for you to actually get a picture of what's going on. So you're monitoring weight. If your goals are to lose body fat, then obviously we need to just understand that there's a difference there, and that jumping on the scales and losing 10 pounds, but losing 2 pounds of body fat, and then the rest from water, from food that was in your system and so on, is only the same from being on top of your goals point of view as losing that 2 pounds of fat and nothing else. So there's such a big range there of where you might need to be. And then obviously we can even be losing body fat and your weight could be a little bit higher. It doesn't happen often, this, so please be aware, but you could jump on the scales, and because of you might be 4 or 5 pounds down in body fat, but because of what we've just spoke about having a bad 1 or 2 days, where there's factors that are going to influence your weight, it can make you feel like you're actually worse than where you started, when body composition might be completely different. Point there at the bottom is BMI worth listening to. For me, it still absolutely is. I completely get everyone's argument about, oh, I'm gaining muscle mass, and I've got a lot of lean mass. Fine, we look at BMI as a measure of health, and a lot of the studies, a lot of the correlations all looking at BMI. So if you have a particularly high BMI, a key goal, unless you've got a reason to be keeping that high for any sort of specific length of time, say you're going in for a powerlifting comp but you have to weigh a certain amount to lift more weight, fine. If not, and that's going to be a decision that you have to make in terms of compromising your health to keep your weight higher. Sometimes people do it, and sometimes I'll assist people doing it and make sure that obviously they are as healthy as they can be within the realms of what they need to achieve. But for most people just looking for weight loss, the excuse and the reasoning of, oh, well, I've got more muscle mass probably isn't really a particularly good excuse, simply because more muscle mass doesn't necessarily mean that you're at much less risk than anyone else with a little bit less muscle but the same BMI as you. Just a point that I wanted to make. Have you got anything for that one? Yeah, cool. So macros, protein, carbs, fats, alcohol, we've said this, they make up the calorie intake, the energy intake, but they have different roles. So carbs, we all look at carbs as, I mean, a lot of the time when it comes to dieting, we look at carbs as bad. And that's probably not the worst sort of approach, to be honest. However, really important for cognitive function. So, in terms of regulating your blood sugar, is obviously, they're going to really impact your hormones like insulin that are going to change your energy levels. But energy in terms of energy for thinking, for cognitive function and for movements or for exercise, especially any sort of reasonable level intensity of exercise, carbs are going to be your go-to. So that's what your body's going to want to use. Now, whether it needs to use it, we'll talk about in a second. But also gut health and a lot of high carb foods. We're also looking at bringing in fiber as well. Fiber, I suppose you could argue that it's a type of carbohydrate, but your body just can't break it down. But some of these are really essential for gut health as well. So we need to be aware of that. Now, when it comes to protein, where does everyone's mind jump? We'll jump to, well, that's building muscle. So if I have too much, I'll build too much muscle mass. Protein is crucial for building muscle, but it's also crucial for so many other things. Your entire just repairing from training back to baseline is a key function of protein. It's, your signaling molecules, your enzymes, your body's ability to adapt to training, most of your transporters in your blood to actually get things from one place to another. A lot of it requires you to have adequate protein in your diet. Again, we'll talk about what adequate is, but just really important to understand that your training and being in a sort of a calorie and energy surplus is going to determine. If you're training to build muscle and you're within that range of building muscle, you've got the training, then you've got the adequate energy intake in terms of energy surplus, and then you've got the genetic and hormonal factors that we need to consider in terms of whether you're going to build a hell of a lot of muscle. For most people on a diet, this absolutely isn't something that you need to be worrying about. What you need to be doing is taking on enough protein to be repairing from your training, to be making sure that you're optimizing health, because obviously training will be and should be something, exercise should be something that you're all doing. So taking on enough protein is going to be crucial to maintain health, maintain performance, and actually mean that you're adapting quicker to get to the body comp that you want. A point on this is that a lot of people think that, and I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago on my own social medias. People think that being lean is the same sort of physical structure as being overweight. You've just got less body fat. That's absolutely not the case. The way that your body works when you're lean is completely different to someone that's got more body fat and that's sedentary. So in terms of your actual muscle structure is completely different. How your muscles take on that energy, how your body releases hormones and transports fats and takes fats into your muscles. All of this is completely different. So while your body's adapting to being better able to use fats, for example, better able to transport fats and get them into the muscle and be able to metabolize things better and be able to regulate your blood sugars better and get sugars into your muscle rather than chipping them back and converting them to fats and then chipping them to your fat stores. All of these things happen from your training session and then having the right nutrients available to then make the adaptations within your muscle. Obviously, I'm trying to keep that dead simple, but it's just such an important point, is that people assume that, oh, well, all I'm trying to do is I'm this person, that I work the exact same as this other person, I've just got more body fat. And it's not the case. We have to understand that protein is going to allow your muscles to start to transition to better deal with different foods.
And I'll tell you why that is important, because a lot of people, when they start journey with us, start with a type of body composition. And then as the information that person's given, whilst they've just got maybe a high body fat percentage and they're trying to lose weight, that information changes as we get nearer to this lean end of the spectrum. That information, the nutritional requirements for that person do adapt, do change. The information that you're given does change. You know, listening to someone that's 12% body fat and giving advice to someone about carbohydrate intake, about protein intake, that's 12% body fat at 80 kilograms.
Has been training regularly for a certain amount of time. That's
got that is a completely different what is important for a person that's got a 25% body fat, that's a similar sort of weight, it's not been training, So this again just doesn't help with the sort of confusing sort of where it stands point. That's why I'm saying that we've got to look at this as where are you right now? What is it that you need to take away? Where do you need to be focusing your attention when it comes to diet?
I'll make things dead simple as we get to the end of this, but you have to understand this to start with. Guys, hopefully that made a little bit of sense, by the way. So please let me know in the chat if it did, or if you feel a little bit sort of like your mind's blown from that last bit about protein. That was actually the first bit about protein. I'll leave the rest of it for a second. Fats, and again, we look at fats as, I've got too much energy because I've got too much fat stored. Fats, for a start, aren't just passive tissue. Fats have a lot of really key roles. So hormone production, organ function, vitamin absorption, nutrient absorption, immune function. So again, cutting fats out of your diet may not necessarily be the right approach or a good approach, because if you're not taking on any fats in your diet, then you're certainly going to develop some nutrient deficiencies, because there's no way that the nutrients can get absorbed into your system, if nothing else, even if you've got plenty of fat already stored. Alcohol then. I suppose the key things about alcohol is that there's no essential function for it. So our body doesn't really need it. Carbs, you can sort of argue that there's no essential function for them. Protein, you've got essential amino acids. That's a bit that I'm not going to go into. Fats, you've got essential fats that your body can't make and that you need to take in through your diet. Alcohols are not that. Is it an issue? If you are occasionally drinking within daily units, there's probably no downside whatsoever. And by that, I do mean within your recommended daily units, and I do mean occasionally, maybe once, twice a week, sort of probably higher end, because if we're getting beyond that, then there's obviously what other nutrients is it replacing. So there will potentially be a downside beyond that. If you're binge drinking or you're going out and having a lot of one like occasion, if it's once every couple of months, that's still not going to be an issue. Your body will probably deal with that. If it's a regular thing, then obviously it won't. If nothing else, while you're metabolizing that alcohol, anything else in your system is one, there may be bits of damage going on. You can't sweat it out after drinking, for example, because what happens is that there's so much disruption to your system as a whole. That's why we don't feel great. There's so much disruption to your body. There's disruption to your heart rate and things there. Exercising high intensity after you've been drinking is really bad approach anyway. So it's not something that you want to be looking at, and not something that you want to be doing. So realistically, those days can come in, but they should be few and far between. When you are drinking, that's going to be your priority for your body to use that energy, which means that anything else that you take on is going to be really sort of stored energy rather than metabolized, rather than used up. I'm going to keep it pretty much as simple as that for alcohol. I'm hoping it was simple. Why is this confusing? In terms of why is diet confusing in general? Obviously, you've been watching this now, and you know that straight away there's things that you probably didn't know about nutrition already. And there's a couple of different approaches that we can take. For example, it's probably going to be context dependent. So I'm going to give the example on protein recommendations. Protein recommendations, the RDA, the way you are not really at risk of being protein deficient, is anything above 0.8 grams per kilo body weight per day. However, if you're dieting, that's for people that are looking to just maintain lean mass, not make any training adaptations, not make any physical adaptations, and not in an energy deficit. So not trying to lose body fat at the time. In all of those situations, if you are trying to lose body fat, if you are training, if you are looking for physical changes and adaptations, then you're going to want more protein than that, because your body's utilizing more amino acids. It's utilizing more, and amino acids are protein as it's broken down in your body. So the fact that people are saying, well, on my diet, I only have this amount of protein, if there's a reason to do it, then, you know, we may want to look at that. There might be reasons to have low protein diets, but for the most part, we're going to be wanting certainly more than that, and going quite a bit above that, up to say, you know, realistically 1.2 to 2 grams per kilo a day on weight loss plans is probably completely reasonable. You might want to go beyond that, but it is going to be person to person dependent based on what you're most comfortable with from a diet point of view. And you may want to go way above that. So as you get leaner, what you might find is that your diets are a little bit harder to do. They're getting a bit more extreme, and you'll see a lot of people, you know, when they get into the back end of the diet, go really high on protein and really low on the other nutrients. Again, short term it's a strategy that can work, but long term it's probably not going to be the best thing. Anything to add for that?
No, we spoke about that earlier. So I think the only thing that I would say is that I think this is where a lot of people go wrong with diets, is that they maybe concentrate on the wrong type of nutrients as they're coming in. So rather than looking at, for example, like working it out, we've been guilty of this as a business, because it's so much easier for us to give a percentage. So we might say 40% carbs, 40% protein, 20% fat, because it's pretty much like nearly there or thereabouts for a lot of the numbers that we set your diets on. And then we might say, look, we're going to go higher protein. It's, you know, now 50% protein, 30% carbs, whatever. I think that it's important sometimes that we actually take a step back and just have a look at your weight, where you're at, how much actually you need, and also what type of diet you're used to. For example, if you're someone that eats a high protein, lowish carb diet anyway, you know, making adaptations where you increase protein a little bit might put you at 2.5, whereas for someone else, just to get you to 1.2 or 1.5 might be a massive change to your diet. So it's about pitching where you're currently at and then going for something that you think, you know, okay, that's where I've got to go next.
Now, key point on this, really key point. If you're just starting out with your diet, don't worry about this at all. Go back to the habits. Don't worry about exactly how much protein you need. If you're early stages of a weight loss journey, eat a decent amount of protein, 25 grams, 25 to 30 grams, 4 times a day, and you will have no issues. Let's just sort of make it that simple. And then we can look at refining it as we get further on. So
I think you have to have done the diet for at least 2 to 3 weeks before you try to make any sort of adaptations to it. Especially from the 6 habits thing.
And you know what, you know, again, we spoke about this, but it's really difficult to know how much protein your body needs. Everyone, when we talk about nutrition, everybody is an individual. So just go with what's working. As long as you're getting results initially, if you're getting results with the habit, stick to that, and we can refine it as we get there. The other thing then, low carb diets. Guys, please let me know if you're currently, just again, drop it in the chat, if you're currently following a low carb diet as well, because I think this will be really interesting.
Funny, because someone put a picture in the group the other day. We've been talking about increasing protein levels, higher protein, healthy eating, healthy diets. I don't know why you put them pictures. Did we chuck them in the end? I don't know. They're awesome. So later on you'll see like some of this context of like good and bad diets, and like healthy and not healthy, and what low carb is, and all this sort of thing. And what we actually have to look at is what's important in the diet for the individual. So low carbs, for example, sometimes when people are trying to lose weight, it's probably the easiest way we get results from clients, because we keep them on we know that they can eat a lot of veg, because it's still relatively, for the amount of quantity that you eat, it relatively isn't a right lot of carbs. We cut the things that have got carbs out of someone's diet. It's generally the things that are probably unnecessary or not adding a load of nutritional value. In most cases, when they're not like veggies. So
I think that the key point on this, the key point that I want to make is that if you're on a lower carb diet, then the question is, do you need to fuel your training sessions? Because we know that high intensity training uses carbohydrate. You're not going to store much carbs in your body. So do we need to be fueling them training sessions? But if your goal is fat loss, this is quite an obvious one. You don't train to intensities that your body can't handle for a start. So, you might have been in the gym at some point and you might have felt a little bit sick because your body's struggling to regulate blood sugar. If that's the case, initially we go a little bit lower carb anyway. Low carb is relative. For a start, I have some people on a low carb diet that might be 250 grams a day, dependent on their activity levels, versus some people on under 50 grams a day, which is more like a sort of typical low carb diets. Low carb diets aren't the same as keto diets, because low carb diets with high protein and moderately high protein then automatically are not a keto diet. Keto is very much based on driving in much more fat. But if you're fueling your exercise sessions with carbs, then that opportunity to mobilize and utilize more fats, all you're doing realistically is saying to your body, I'm still wanting to use carbs at this point. I'm still wanting to use glycogen as a fuel at this point. I'm still wanting to use carbohydrate as a fuel, which means that it doesn't need to dig into them fat stores, which means that you're not going to find it any easier. And training your body to utilize fat, whether we go back to energy balance and energy deficits and things which we can talk about now in terms of, does it matter throughout the day? Does it matter if I'm using more fats, throughout the day anyway, and then I'm just putting carbs on there? It's still not really necessary to do at those times, because you are limiting one of your biggest opportunities to utilize more fat. So if fat loss is your main goal, staying on relatively low carb, and relatively low carb is low for where you are within the context of sort of full, not only your training, but how many total calories your body needs. But then realistically, try not to fuel it. You can have protein shakes and you can have protein-based meals after training and things. But in that situation, if fat loss is your goal, I certainly would be doing quite a few training sessions with low carbs. If performance is your goal, if you're not bothered about fat loss at all, but you're bothered about making sure that you're fueling your training sessions, you're fueling the adaptation to that training session from a performance standpoint, as in you want to run a faster 10K, then absolutely you need to be making sure that you're fueled up for some of those sessions. Not all of them, but again, I'm not going to go into that.
I think this is where a load of you get this wrong. Right now, this is where a load of people, when they first start the gym, get this wrong. And the reason that they get this wrong is because when you look at like carbohydrates and carbs in a diet, and someone that's just starting out, for example, training, then they start, they come to the gym and you work your arse off, and I get it. People want to run faster, they want to run further. They think that it's not doing anything if they don't if they don't basically work hard in the gym. Now, think about what Josh just said there about what your body utilizes, when it utilizes what. It's important. It's really important that you actually consider that your diet is basically the thing that will control your amount of fat loss. So if you're new to the gym, or if, say, for example, you was going to start your fitness kick in January and you sat at home and you're thinking, gym's shut, so I can't. Well, consider that the gym's only 3 times a week or 4 times a week for some of you. And the rest of the day, you're able to work in a relatively sort of, not necessarily using glycogen, not necessarily using carbohydrates, or going for a walk, things like that, where you can utilize fat a little bit more. That's actually more efficient for people when you've heard about the fat burning zone, right? So you've heard about green zone or my zone, if you're one of our clients that use my zone, or a lower intensity program, because it utilizes fat more than it utilizes glycogen stores. Now, for most of you that are just trying to lose fat, what I would suggest is that if we keep your diet with low carbohydrate and we're not eating a lot of carbohydrate, our body won't necessarily crave it or need it as much as time goes on. So therefore, when you're trying to lose fat and you go out for a walk, for example, and you're just at sort of 65%, 70% max heart rate, nothing where you're really sort of blowing, nothing where you're really sort of feeling sick, like Josh said, it's so much easier to do that while you're in a low carb state. You don't necessarily need all that energy to fuel that type of workout. A lot of people get it wrong because they go on this low carb diet in January. It's a typical time that people do it. Go on a low carb diet and then go to HIIT classes. And you try and fuel your HIIT high intensity training session off a low carb diet. And again, one of the girls put this in the group. She's like, yeah, but then I get to the Saturday and I just want to pig out. And that's because your body is going, you're having to fight the fact that your body needs carbohydrate because it's doing high intensity glycogen using activity 3 to 4 times a week where you're working your arse off and you're really sort of depleted in terms of your glycogen stores. Therefore, on a Saturday, you do get a pizza because your body needs that pizza. It doesn't have a negative effect on your mindset because you've had to go, oh shit, because your body's been using glycogen and you're not giving it any glycogen. So for some of you, actually, the gym's being closed is probably a benefit because all you need to concentrate on now is that walking. Yes, I know a lot of you are doing the HIIT sessions with us, but moderating when you eat carbs and how many carbs you eat should be easier at the minute, especially if you are, like Josh said, if you're new to this and you're just starting out, walking and things like that, so underrated because you don't need to eat a lot of carbohydrates when you're doing it. If you're training 3 or 4 days a week, for example, where you are using high intensity, maybe we can talk about this on another webinar probably, but maybe increase the carbs around them training sessions and keep the carbs the rest of the time relatively low, and you know, weight loss is a lot easier to come in. So
Leanne, just going into that question in terms of a specific amount or percentage of carbs, I can't give it without looking at the big picture and without looking at the context. So a general low carb diet, I'd say somewhere between 50 and 100 grams of carbs a day is, and for most people, that's going to be the lower end, maybe even below 50 grams a day is what we generally consider sort of a normal low carb diet. One thing that people tend to do at that point is that they'll go that low with the carbs and then the calories, because even though they may be up in the protein, people very rarely increase the fats when they're doing that, which means that the calories tend to drop to, say, 1,1200 calories a day. And for most people, especially if you're trying to exercise, that is really low. Now, if you've got a lot of body fat to lose, especially if you're doing any higher intensity exercise for exactly the reasons Jamie's just spoke about. So if you're keeping your exercise relatively low, like low intensity, but you're doing a hell of a lot of it, you could probably deal with really low levels of carbs anyway, because you know your body will use fats up to about, I don't know if any of you's got the my zone belts, but up to when you're getting out of the blue zone is where your body's going to start to say, you know what, I am now at my maximum fat burning that I can do. And then fat burning will rapidly drop off. Everyone at their own rate. But at the hardest intensity you can work, your body's burning virtually zero fat and all carbohydrate. And there's not really not much of a question about that. The question comes from, what have you done with your food? So if you're on low carb, you've been low carb for a few days, your body will adapt and it'll use more fats at those higher intensities as well. Okay. So I'd suggest for most people, stick to, if fat loss is the main goal, stick to the lower end. Sort of, it's going to be individual, but somewhere under 100 grams a day. Yeah. Get your protein levels somewhere that's, I mean, I'd say 1.5 grams roughly per kilo of body weight might be a good starting point. See how that goes.
Depending on your weight, I think, as well, because
depending on, I mean, whether we go to lean body mass and things like that. But for most people, that'd still be reasonable, and then make the rest up with fats in terms of your total calories. Have to.
And that's
I would, Leanne. I'd look at changing that. If you want to drop me your calories in there as well, that's going to be important, because percentages, and guys, this is really important. Actually, I'm really glad that you've put this on. Percentages can be completely misleading, because a 50% carb diet at only 1,000 calories it might really be a 30% carb diet, and you're not eating enough protein and fats. Yeah, exactly. And that's something that we really need to consider. This is why, obviously, with nutrition coaching, we tend to go from grams, and this is why we're going to talk about tracking food, because we need to understand the percentages. You know, you can have a perfect diet based on 100 calories a day if you're only looking at percentages, because it could look like it's 20% protein, 30% carbs, 50%, whatever split you wanted to go for. It could look perfect, but the calories have to be considered first. So they have to be the number one. Hopefully that makes sense. Guys, please let me know if any of this doesn't make sense, and if you've got any questions as we go. The only thing
that I would add to that, Leanne, is that when people start to sort of consider the diet, and you look at diet as percentages, again, I would question whether or not everybody's hitting the 6 habits first. Like, are you having enough veg in your diet? Because when people tend to sort of try to do low carb, what I always find is that people do low carb by removing everything that's not meat, and you go on like an Atkins diet for however long it is, because it's what they know is like eggs are no carbs, chickens no carbs, sausages no carbs, burgers no carbs. But then they forget that one of the most important things is this amount of vegetables that you're getting, 6-7 portions of veg a day. And if you're just removing carbohydrate without looking at that vegetable, like having greens and having veg, it's so important that we don't just remove everything that's carb-based, because you can have a plate full of broccoli and it'll be 8-9 grams of carbs, but it is so important that we get that in.
Obviously saying their calories set around 1300. Rather than me, because I've no context on this, I'm not going to give any guidance on there, but if you're going to drop your carbs a little bit, make sure that your calories don't change. Make sure that the context that we're talking about there isn't about calories. We're talking about what macronutrient it is. So if you're going to pull your carbs down, see how you feel off slightly lower carbs maybe, but make sure that you're increasing either fats or protein, dependent on how much protein you're having at the minute, to make sure that you're keeping the calories set at that. We only want to really change one thing at once when we're doing this. And that is a fairly low sort of calorie amount anyway. That should certainly be low enough to get your results. So tracking, do we need to use MyFitnessPal, chronometer, things like that? Hopefully we've covered this, so I'm just going to breeze over it. But I'd suggest that everybody always spends a period of time, a couple of weeks at least, where you try and track everything. Now, this isn't how you need to live. This isn't a forever thing. But if you're going to track your numbers, then you're going to understand what foods are high protein, what foods are high carbs, what foods are high fats, what are protein and fats, what are protein and what's carbs and fats, what are higher in sugars. And you'll just start to build a picture, and that picture is then going to inform your choices when you go out for a meal. I know that might not be anytime soon, but when you're going out somewhere, or even if you're getting a takeaway at home, I know that it might not be often, or if you're trying to cook a meal and figure out what's going to be the best choices at that time. For me, tracking foods is the best way for you guys to understand what your actual diet looks like. I've had so many times where people have gone, I eat really healthy, Josh, I don't understand what's going on. And as soon as we start to track, I don't even need any input initially. They go, oh, actually, I thought I was eating very healthy, but this double cream that I'm making the curries with has actually put an extra 900 calories onto my tea. And people might not realize that. So I'd always say tracking your food as a start point. If nothing else, it gives you an accurate starting point for where you are. However, if you feel like that's a little bit too much at this point, that's absolutely fine. Some people aren't numbers focused anyway. And for your coaches, certainly for me, if you were to sort of say, right, well, I'm having this much fat and this much protein and this much veg, and you were to use the hand portion sizes, I know that Alex put a really good post in the group last week about this. If you were to use the hand portion size, this is actually a really easy, simple way for you to start to understand how much food you need, like what your portion sizes should be. And it's just a good starting point. And, people get such solid results from that. But again, it still comes down to understanding your food, and there's no way around this. In terms of practical considerations, if you are tracking, I would suggest if you're tracking anything that needs weighing, then weigh it. Make sure that you get a good digital set of scales at home. Once you've done this for a couple of weeks, you'll know it, and it'll be much easier. Tracking's always real difficult at first. Pretty much everything you're gonna track uncooked, but make sure that you're selecting the uncooked options. And one of the most useful tools is going to be pre-tracking when you plan your day. So if you're not sure what's going to make that perfect 1700 calorie day with 140 grams of protein, then try and plan it the day before. Try and track what you're going to have the day before. And if you track and add everything into your diary for the following day, you can see, oh, well, I was going to have this there, but actually that's completely changed all my numbers. What if I swap that for something else? And if you do that, then you can get all your numbers right. You can figure out what foods are going to be good. And ultimately, long term, you're going to find this really easy, because you're going to have lists of foods that's right. Well, I could have this food. I need protein, so I can have any of these options. I need carbs, so I can have any of these options. I need more fats. These are my options. I need more protein and carbs. These are my options. And once you start to build that go-to, then realistically, you're never going to struggle with your diet again. And it does only take a couple of weeks. It's just a fairly intense few weeks. So if you're not ready to do it, hand portion sizes are fine, but you still need to track your food. One other way that I do it is photos, and we use this with the nutrition coaching as well, is that if that's all too much for you, you can send on the nutrition coaching service, you can obviously, but this might be something that you want to do at the minute and be using the Facebook group for, but you can take a photo of your meals, send it in and say, can you give me a bit of feedback on this? The key thing on that though is that we need to know the context of that photo. One meal is never good, bad or indifferent. Any one meal might be absolutely fine in context. So we need to obviously be able to see the bigger picture. So if you're going to post that, please tell me what you sort of why you're having that meal, what you see the benefit of that meal being, and then we'll be able to give you a bit of a rating. If you're posting things and you know the macros, or you're posting to ask about what the macros probably are, it's going to be difficult for us to give it you. If you're posting just for us to say, oh, this is a good meal, a bad meal, it's quite difficult. So make sure that you give us the context there. I suppose that's probably the key thing.
I think that's what we spoke about, isn't it?
Yeah. So practical food choices. On the go, what options should you go for? I know that I had a message this morning, or yesterday morning, sorry, about I travel a lot. So what foods should I be going for if I'm stopping at service stations or, Sainsbury's, just anywhere that you can just grab a meal? That's going to, unfortunately, that's obviously, again, it's another one that I can't give you a set answer now because it's going to be in the context of your diet. However, you're going to be wanting to generally, for most people, rather than going for what we usually would, which would be like a sandwich and a packet of crisps and maybe an orange juice or something. Well, what is that meal is going to be, even if it's a chicken sandwich that we look at and we think, oh, well, that's high protein, or peanut butter on toast or something like that in the morning where we think that's high protein. We need to be really aware that some of these things that we might think are high protein, actually, if I were to look at that lunch of a chicken sandwich with crisps and an orange juice, is 90% carbs, a little bit of fat, a little bit of protein. So we need to be really aware of that. So the choices that you should be making are things that are going to benefit you. Now, if you need carbs in your diet at that point, and your main goal is something that's more performance orientated, then fine. But if you're wanting to go lower carbs, you might still get get a sandwich. That might be fine. That might still fit. But then rather than your packet of crisps, you might go for one of the protein options, whether it's a couple of boiled eggs or some cooked chicken, cooked meats, something like that. They might be a good idea. Obviously, fruit is generally a good idea. We do need to be a little bit mindful of the carbs and sugars in that, but much less of an issue for fruit. And then obviously the drinks, to be honest, for me, and this is personal opinion, you will find it a million times easier if your drinks are pretty much all 0 calorie. If you stick to your low calorie drinks, then life will probably be easier. The only exception I'd probably say is a protein shake, because what people don't do is they don't think about they might get a smoothie because it looks healthy, but it might be 300 calories of just sugar. And it's very easy to go wrong with this. Even fizzy drinks, if you're dieting and you're having Coca-Cola, then what you might, just initially, if you can, swap it for one of the 0 calorie options. I know that it sounds dead simple, but they are going to be really useful things.
I think it's important that people have like a couple of things that they always get. If they we say all the time, don't we? There's a couple of things that when me and Josh are working all day, like the go-to meals that we always get. So like, what option should I go for? Well, we always have there's a Spar just up the road here, and literally, if we're hungry, Josh will get a tuna mayo, and then he'll get a boiled egg and some chicken bites or whatever it is. And that sort of thing, having the same sort of thing, exactly what it is in the diet coke, exactly what it is that you're going to have.
And it only takes 30 seconds to track if you are tracking it.
What I would suggest.
That's obviously when you get caught out a little bit, not necessarily an everyday thing. But
and the other thing that I would say is, if you know that you're on the road from, let's say you're on the road from 8 o'clock and you don't get on until 7 o'clock. If you have 2 protein shakes or a protein shake and you have a butty, or you have these different things put in the midpoint of the day, then make sure that the thing that you have for your tea and the thing that you have for your breakfast is going to support your balance throughout the full day. It doesn't really matter that one meal that you, if let's say you have to grab something from Subway and you have a double meat sandwich from Subway and it's got quite a lot of carbs in it or whatever else, or just make sure that your tea is not a similar sort of meal or made up of similar sort of things. You know, you are organised enough to know I'm on the road this day, I'm going to be eating this during the day, this is what I'm going to have for my tea, for my lunch, whatever it is on the back of it.
Yeah. Guys, if you do have questions, please, this is the time to be dropping them in. Yeah, go and see what's yeah, I don't know if it's locked. So yeah, guys, if you've got questions, please ask now. Modifying your day, this is really important that, you know, sometimes we might need to modify the nutrition that day. We might need to be, and I know that we've already said this in terms of pre-planning, but if you end up sort of with a meal that you weren't intending to have, say you end up with a really high calorie lunch because you're out and you know, that is your option that you wanted to go for, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's something that you might then need to think about, right, well, actually, I was intending to have this, I've ended up having this, so now I need to modify the rest of my day so that my numbers overall throughout the full day, or so that my overall sort of meals tend to match up. One meal will never make a difference. One day realistically won't make a difference. It's about what we apply consistently. But what that means is that if you do end up having a meal that wasn't quite on plan, you can modify other meals to make sure that that's somewhere near. Now, obviously, it's not a perfect approach, but say that we are going to be looking at calories and you've had 1,000 calories after breakfast and you're only looking to have 1,800 calories throughout your day. To be honest, sticking to somewhere around that 1,800 might just mean that you have much lower calorie meals for the rest of your day. And that might be absolutely a valid approach and a fine approach that has no issue at all with you going about, because that's not necessarily going to lead to any deficiencies. It's about making sure that the options that you choose are working for you. And the last point is thinking about hunger. So if we have really sugary, sort of low calorie, sugary meals, or foods that are very sort of palatable, like McDonald's, it might be pretty high calorie, but again, aren't necessarily going to make you feel full. They are going to set you up for really struggling on a diet. If you're feeling hungry all the time, you're going to struggle. This is a really key point in terms of why protein, fluid intake, veg intake, fruit intake is so important, because they can help you to feel less hungry. And if they help you to feel less hungry, you're going to find it much easier to stick to your diet. So just being on top of that, being aware that sugary foods and really highly palatable foods, you're going to want more of, you're going to want to eat more, and they're generally not going to fill you up for as long, especially if it's high carbs and high fats with very little protein. You realistically, high fats foods are generally quite filling. High protein foods generally filling, and a lot of veg is generally filling. Carbs on their own, generally not so, but if you keep to, you know, if you are serious about dieting, keep to carbs that are just carbs. Keep to your plain rice, keep to your plain potato and things like that, and you will soon find that you're not that bothered. If you have chips with salt and barbecue sauce, then you might sort of find it much easier to overeat on that that carb sauce. Just things to be aware of is don't make it easy for yourself to go off track with your diet.
Okay.
Oh, that was your
that's all right. Just
slide. And this is just an example. There's a guy that Jamie follows on Instagram that's he tends to put up a lot of things just in terms of breaking these relationships with food, because this middle one, clean and dirty diet, you know, that one looks really healthy as a breakfast at 1,050 calories versus one that looks very unhealthy. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to energy balance. So there might be certain benefits of having that, but from a fat loss perspective, actually, you know, the sugar's probably higher in the clean option. Because of the shape. Yes, the nutrient density is higher, but the calories are far, far higher as well. So effectively, you could argue that you'd be better off with the
this is where when people fall off the wagon, for example, because they've had a bad meal or they've gone and they've cocked up. In reality, from a calorie point of view, if your weight loss goal, Emma, if you're on, or if you've been watching, back to what you were saying the other day about, I've had this bad meal and throws me off. In reality, it might not actually throw you off that much. You might just think it does because of these good and bad and dirty and clean words that people have that chuck around on. Next slide. because we're going to be looking to get to half time.
We're done, guys. If there was a sentence that I could say to to summarize this, I suppose it'd be this: it'd be eat a relatively low carb, moderately high protein diet with enough fat, and add additional calories to fuel your goals, training, and adaptations. Unfortunately, it's not a go and have this food. It's not that, because it's all. Hopefully what you've seen is that the reason that it's confusing is that it's all context dependent. But going relatively low carb, moderate to high protein diet with enough fats to meet the base requirements. And if we're going to talk about numbers, anything from sort of 0.5 gram of fat per kilo of body weight is probably going to be enough, as long as they're good fats. You're probably not going to have any issues there. Anywhere between that and 1 gram per kilo of body weight. And then, if you've got training goals to add to, you've got a lot of endurance training that you're doing, your training performance focus is your main thing, then obviously add more calories. You might want to make sure that them calories are coming from additional carbs so that you can fuel your training. But if it's fat loss, realistically, we've got stored energy anyway. We're trying to tap into that stored energy. We need to take in protein regularly. We need to take in our essential fats. We don't necessarily need to take in huge amounts of carbs. We want to take in enough fiber. So we do need to be mindful of that. But again, it's not zero carb. It's just relatively low carb based on what your energy demands are. And obviously, training and exercise is going to have a huge input on this. But every single person, there is no reason at all that you wouldn't be exercising on a diet. Any diet that says do not exercise on this diet unless you're about to go in for surgery in 2 or 3 days, then write that diet off, because your diet should be supportive for exercise. I mean, Jamie spoke about sort of your short-term 4-week diets. A lot of diets, probably the more popular diets, are miles shorter term than that, sort of 7-day diets, which is just crazy if you're looking at it from a long-term point of view. I know that my most recent sort of diet was about 7 months that I was dieting for, and it was sort of the reason that I'd say that that's the duration of my diet is because that's when I was in a sort of calorie deficit or going back to maintenance, or in a calorie deficit or back to maintenance. So that lasted for about 7-8 months. And within that, there was about 18 kilos, 19 kilos that I'd lost. And just by making it something that was sustainable, now I'm obviously sort of out of that, not in a deficit. I haven't been in a deficit for a while, but I will still have odd weeks where I try and sort of be back on top of my diet, be back eating healthy. And honestly, this is the way that it's probably going to be the easiest for everyone to do it, is, relatively low carb. Think about your protein, have protein every meal. This statement, put with our 6 habits, as complex as the stuff is that we've gone into today, this statement and the 6 habits should be the starting point for everyone.
In a sentence.
Could have just started with this, to be honest. I don't know why we didn't. I wanted to give a bit of context.
I'll just sort of say that on that point, last thing, I'm going to go and get the second half. But I think that it's really important that people sort of see this as, and this is where, if you're a client of ours and you're watching, this is where we go wrong with a lot of people as an industry, is because we look at this with you whilst we think you're struggling with it for a 4-week period, for an 8-week period. And in reality, this is something that we should be looking at all the time. I think that's why we've introduced nutrition coaching as a separate thing, because you don't necessarily have to look at this forever and have to keep adapting it. And once you are about where you want to be, it doesn't actually take that much of a change and that much of an adaptation to get there. Like Josh said, what is difficult is making this, someone working with us on nutrition for 6 months and going through a 6-month diet or a 7-month diet. Because in reality, if we look at what our long diets are to make lasting long-term changes, and in reality, that's as bad as that sounds. You work with this for, it's not an 8-week, this is my 8-week diet, I'm going to fix it. That's not what Josh's nutrition coaching program is about. When we talk about nutrition coaching, it isn't just setting macros or calories, it is what it is. From that respect. I'm sure I keep hearing something.
No, it wasn't earlier though.
Fireworks it were open. I know. Anyway.
Guys, if you do have questions, unfortunately, unless you're really quick, we're out of time. But genuinely, if you do have questions, just drop them into the Facebook group and we will get back to you. I hope that that's made some sort of sense. Obviously, it might mean that you're questioning now what you're doing, and that's not a bad thing. it's not, you know, it's the fact that you're aware of diet and things and what sort of diet, what sort of approach would be good for you. Then obviously that's always a benefit anyway. The more info that you've got, the better. It may be that you don't have to change anything at all. It may be that obviously this has already all been considered for you. But hopefully, in terms of just practicality, in terms of making it easy to do, then this has helped.
Apparently, football's still no, so we haven't missed that yet.
All right. Cheers, guys. See you later.